right. I've got that it's the top of the hour. And I'm going to give us just a couple of more minutes to allow people who might be a little behind to catch up. And then we'll begin our Deep Adaptation Forum special event with Molly Young Brown, co-author of Coming Back to Life, the open source, basically the full-blown manual and context for the long famous Work That Reconnects. I think this promises to be a very vibrant and important conversation for really anyone who's in the facilitation world with regard to what's often now called deep adaptation work, basically the inner work that has any chance at all of expanding our capacities to be present in the face of ever larger scale stressors in the world. Really great to see a number of people here on the call. We're just waiting a minute or two more before we start. And yes, there's somebody had a question, is this going to be recorded? Yes, we will be recording this. We are recording this. And it will be posted on the Deep Adaptation Forum for all to see whenever you would like. But you are, my friends, you are lucky to be able to be a part of this live. We're very much wanting this to be a Q&A, a back and forth, an exchange, and truly a seminar conversation of how does the facilitation of deep inner work need to stay current? How does it need to evolve to stay current in the face of a rapidly changing world? So my name is Dean Walker. I'm a volunteer moderator on what's now called the Holistic Approaches and Guidance group here on the Deep Adaptation Forum. For many of you, that's, yeah, of course it is. That's how you found out and so on. But I'm just saying these things because there probably are some new people here on the call. And I hope you will feel free to use that chat and chat to me directly if you have questions or a concern. And also, I think you'll get the tone of this call is very conversational. And so after we do a little bit of an introduction here and perhaps a little check-in and setting the space just a little bit, we can ask Molly to do a bit of reading from, I don't know how many people got to see or particularly to read the essay that I included in the invitation to today's meeting. It's an extraordinary essay. And it really motivated me to get in touch with Molly and ask her to be a part of this meeting today. So per Molly's request, I'd like to first, actually, Molly, could I just ask you to just say hi to the folks? And
Sure. Hi. Yeah. And I've asked Dean if we could all introduce ourselves very briefly. There's a tradition in Canada and the United States, at least, of people naming the lands, the original people of the lands where you live, if you know it. And if you don't, that's just fine. But if you do know where who the traditional original people of where you live, just to acknowledge that is becoming a practice. And should I just go ahead and start, Dean?
yeah, please.
And why don't you call on people?
Okay.
Because otherwise, people won't know who to speak next. So.
Very good. I'll do that.
And I am Molly Brown, and I live in Mount Shasta, California, which is in the far northern part of the state. And it is a lot of different groups of Native peoples lived here. But I give special homage to the Winneman Wintu because I know several members of that tribe.
All right. Thank you, Molly. And I'll just follow very quickly. My name's Dean Walker. I'm from Medford, Oregon. And I currently live and am calling from land that was taken from the Shasta and Tacoma tribes here in Southern Oregon. And the next person on my list is David McNamara. David, would you check in?
Hi, can you hear me?
It's a little low.
Okay, I'll try to get closer to the mic.
Much better, thank you.
Now, I think I'm in shadow, but so it goes.
Aren't we all?
Some of us, sometimes. I live on Bainbridge Island, across from Seattle in the Pacific Northwest. And I actually am not sure of the native peoples that used to live on this island. But needless to say, there was a very thriving native community in this area. And I'm glad to be here.
Very good, thank you. I have some people on the phone. I've just unmuted one. Do you know who you are? And if so, would you check in?
Yes, I think it may be me.
Yep.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Alice Wells, and I live in Brooklyn, New York. And I believe there are 3 tribes that were associated living in and coming through Brooklyn. I don't know their names. I've seen them on the map, and I will make it I commit to learning their names. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. The next person appears to be Alan Zulch. And whoops.
Can you hear me? Oh, there you
Yes.
go. Okay. Hi.
Yes, perfect.
Yes. This is Alan Zulch. I'm calling from Ohlone Territory, which is also known as Palo Alto, California. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And the next person on this list looks like Anne J. Burke. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, here I am. I live in Columbia, South Carolina. As far as I know, this was all Cherokee land.
All right, thank you very much. And the next person would be Art Mitchell, please.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I'm living in Fairfax Station, Virginia, and the original inhabitants were the Dogue, D-O-A-G, and they're pretty much gone. The others were and are the Potomac, and first of all, the Dogue were part of the Piscataway Confederation, which goes up to Washington, D.C. and Maryland and further on into Pennsylvania. The Potomacs were the northernmost tribe of the Powhatan Confederacy. So that's where I am.
Great, thank you, Art, very much. The next person I can see on my list is Christopher Sassano.
Hello, I am in Boulder, Colorado, and there are a couple native tribes here. The Arapahoes, which many things are named after, Arapahoe Mountain, Arapahoe River Peaks and stuff, and then the Utes lived here also. Glad to be here.
Beautiful, beautiful. The next person I see on my list is David Baum.
Hi, calling in from Seattle, Washington, on the Duwamish land. Glad to see everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. And looks like we have someone from yet another continent, Elzan Roos.
Hi, yeah, I'm Elzan. I'm from South Africa, and I would acknowledge the San and the Khoisan, the many tribes, as well as the.
Thank you.
Right. So good to see you, Elzan. Thank you. And have we heard from Larry Glover yet? Need to unmute you. Here we go.
Okay, thanks, Dean. Calling in from Santa Fe, New Mexico, and an active location for many different tribes, and certainly many various Menlo folks in the area I'm in and still here, and some are gone. Appreciate being here today. I'm going to take my video off, by the way, too, because I'll be moving a little bit. Yeah.
Welcome, Larry. I used to live in Los Alamos.
I know, Molly. I really appreciate your work deeply. Thank you.
And it looks like the next person could be Jane.
Hi, I'm Jane from London, and we've had various tribes through at various points in time, but I'm afraid I don't know what they are.
Fair enough. Good to have you here. Thank you. And next would be Janet Lees.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm from the Isle of Man, which is a small island in the middle of the Irish Sea, off the coast, the northwest coast of England. And the I think amongst the earliest inhabitants here are the Celts, so it's a Celtic nation. I'm very, very glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up would be Joe. J-O.
Hi, yeah, I'm also from the Isle of Man.
Joanna!
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, and yeah, the same thing to say is that the original inhabitants have been Celts. We had probably a few Vikings thrown in at different time, a different period of history, but that would be the background. Thank you. Yeah, my camera's not working, sorry.
Joe, thank you. And it's a little difficult to hear you, so when you're next on to speak up, if you would speak a bit louder, that would be great. And thank you. Next would be Julian, J-U-L-I-E-N. Julian.
Hi. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Great. Hi. So I'm in Nelson, BC, on formerly Sinaixt territory. The Sinaixt were not only conquered and subject to genocide, but also declared extinct by the Canadian government, whereas there are not extinct. There's quite a few members there. So.
Thank you. Very, very clear. I appreciate that information about a place I love dearly. Looks like next up would be Justine Clement.
Yes, sorry. Sorry, I've literally just joined. I was a little bit late. So what would you like to know from me?
Just your name and where you're calling from, and if you know anything about the native peoples that originally inhabited the land where you are, then if you could mention that, that would be great. And if you don't know that, that's just fine too.
So Justine Clement, I'm calling from Caterham, which is in Surrey, which is just about half an hour's train ride south of London. In terms of the native people of the land, it's an interesting question because I'm partway through a apprenticeship in British shamanism, and we are learning very much about the land that was England when it was forested, and learning about the animals that roamed here, and a little bit about the people, but it's quite fragmented. I'm learning a little bit about the Norman history, the Norman conquest, and sort of pre-arable farming and post-arable farming in the British Isles, but I'm still very much learning about this. So I think that's probably where I'll leave it for now, because it's quite difficult with Britain to sort of trace a lot of our history in terms of in the same way that we might be able to talk about the gentleman before, how he talked about his land, but I'm no expert at it, so I'm still very much learning, so I can't contribute too much more than that at the moment.
Thank you so much, Justine. And the next person would be Naresh Giangrande.
Hi there, I'm Naresh Giangrande. I'm calling into this call from Totnes in Devon. and it's the land of the ancient Dumnonia people. Although, as several people from the UK have mentioned already, we've had just about everybody through here, from the Romans to the Vikings to Normans and so on. But thank you.
All right, thank you. So good to see you. And next up would be Matthew Paynton.
Hello. So I'm calling from Bulgaria, and we've had Thracians, Bulgars, Slavs, Romans, Ottomans, and Roma people, many of whom still are here.
Great, Matthew, thank you so much. Matthew, yet another of the moderators here at the Holistic Approaches and Guidance group. Next person up on my list is Ophelia.
Hi, everybody. I'm also from, just like Julian, I'm from Nelson, British Columbia, Canada. So I'm on unceded Sinixt territory.
Great, good to have you here.
Thanks.
Next up would be Pam.
Hi, sorry, it took me a sec to unmute. I live in Northern California, in the area that got burned last year. Paradise is our sister city. We're about 10 minutes away.
Oh.
So we are living climate change and climate migrants. We're having a meeting this evening on deep adaptation, so I'm very excited to be meeting with a local group.
Well, remarkable to have you here, and thank you so much for representing for a critically hit area. Thank you. The next person I can see is Radical Joy for a Hard Time.
Hi, this is Sasha Daukas. I volunteer for the organization Radical Joy for Hard Times, and I live in the Missouri Ozarks, which is in the center of the United States. And we did have some early Native Americans here, but mostly it's been a very rough territory that was used for hunting gathering grounds, most recently the Osage Indians.
Well, thank you very much. The next person on my list is Spring Chen.
Hi, I'm Spring. I think I'm the third person who live in Seattle, as far as I can remember. Hi, David and another person. I also live on the land, actually right across the water from the Duwamish tribe. And I am a Chinese myself. I immigrated to America. And of course, my native land was occupied by Chinese.
Thank you so much. Have we heard yet from Tori Reed?
Hi, I'm Tori Reed. I live in Oakland, California, on the traditional lands of the Ohlone.
Yes, very familiar ground. Thank you. Next, please, Tracy Bindell.
Hi, my name is Tracy Bindle, and I live in part-time in Boston, Massachusetts, and then also in New Mexico. And in Boston, we live on the territory of the Wampanoag.
Next up would be Una Devine.
Hello, Una here. I'm actually in Spain, but I'm Irish. And I'm very moved by your question because at the moment, I'm really exploring the way the Irish language, the original Irish language actually came, the alphabet came from the names of trees. So really kind of looking at that sort of interrelationship between just how closely we were at a time connected to nature. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up would be the initials VB.
Hi, my name is Valerie Bauer,
I live in Minnesota in the U.S. And the original people here were Ojibwa and Dakota.
Beautiful. Thank you. Have we heard from Virginia yet? I'm going to
come on right away. We don't want to be sitting here,
yeah,
you know, in silence. So let's.
We're going to continue the interviews, or the introductions, excuse me. And so, is there anyone on the phone who has not yet introduced themselves? Go ahead and choose yourself, unmute, and chime in.
I have not introduced myself. I just appeared. Jens Hultman from Sweden.
Jens, thank you.
I just saw the message, so I will listen and see what happens in the.
All right. Thank you so much for breaking our silence here. Who else on who is on video, is on the screen, has not yet been introduced? Could you wave a hand up in front of the... Great. Michelle, would you check in, please?
Sure. Hi, my name is Michelle Merrill. I'm calling in from Scotts Valley, California, near Santa Cruz.
Great. Thank you. And looks like Brian right next to Michelle.
Hi there, Brian Bailey, calling from Northeast Indiana, originally the home of the Miami tribe.
Yes.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you. And so, am I right in assuming that everyone who's on video now has had a chance to check in? Great. Thank you all for your patience with that process. And I'd like to just ask us all, specifically myself, to breathe in as easy and full a way as possible for a few moments. I'm doing that to return myself to a sense of being at home in my own body. I notice I started to breathe in a shallow way, distracted my attention to my own anxiety, and took me away from being present with you. So a few easy, full breaths. And I'd like to officially and warmly welcome Molly Brown to this meeting of the Holistic Applications and Guidance Group, subgroup of the Deep Adaptation Forum. And for those who don't know Molly, she's been a long time author, facilitator, trainer of trainers, and hopefully much more that she will fill in the gaps of as she would like to be known and introduced. But I can speak of my own experience of being with Molly, having been in the Work That Reconnects with her about 4 or 5 years ago, and then excuse me, in a couple of my own podcasts, Molly's been kind enough to come and join me on some conversations. And it's because of a recent essay, Molly, that you put out in your own blog and then also in the Deep Times Journal, which is a representation of a certain amount of the depth and creative juices flowing in the Work That Reconnects community. And what I found particularly important about it, Molly, was that I've never heard you speak so boldly. You may well speak this boldly all the time at home or in other environments, but I've just never heard it. And I want you to know how deeply I appreciate it. There's really, excuse my language here, but there's really a no bullshit tone to it, matched with your immense heart and passion for bringing this quality of work to people, the quality of work that is at the heart of the work that reconnects. And so I assigned myself the duty of finding a few paragraphs that seemed to represent in a good way and could get us moving in a good way toward this conversation, which is meant to be an open question and answer and an open seminar-like conversation between us all, because it's assumed that there's a certain amount of overlap of our interests and our passions with regard to some kind of work like this, whether we're taking it on personally for ourselves and we come with that, and or we may well be practitioners, counselors, or life coaches, or facilitators in our own right. That's what seems to have most people show up here in the Deep Adaptation Forum. And it's my strong contention that this, at the core of today's conversation, you'll find it if you take the time to read Molly's essay, is that the times are calling for not only the brilliance and the long-standing nature of work like the work that reconnects, but it also requires that we, all of us, in our own practices and then in our own offerings to others, stay on as close to the leading edge as we can of being present to what's being called for in the moment. And that's really what I heard the calling so well described in Molly, your essay. So thank you so much for sitting through this long introduction, Molly. And if you would, please introduce yourself in any way that I haven't yet. And I warmly welcome you here. And if I remember right, you're going to grace us with a bit of reading from the essay as well. So welcome.
Thank you, thank you. Somebody asked for a link to the essay, and I don't know if you can find it, Dean, but it's on my website, which is...
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat.
Good, thank you. And I also want to acknowledge that Satya Deva is leading a week retreat in Italy, and there's 7 people watching from that retreat in Italy. So I'm very touched that it would take time from that retreat to come to this meeting. As I was preparing to, or trying to prepare for this event, I talked to Dean yesterday and said, you know, what should I be doing? What should I be thinking of? And so on. And both of us came to the realization that this is a case in point in these times that we really can't prepare. That because it's completely new territory. Humans have not lived through the challenge that we are living through, except they have in localized situations. But for the entire planet to be challenged in this way is a new experience. And so a lot of what we would prepare in the past, it won't be relevant. So I didn't prepare. I'm just going to be here with you, and I will read a little of my essay and then open it up to responses and questions and so forth. And after a little while, we may break into breakout groups and do a little practice that is a common practice in the Work That Reconnects. So that's kind of the overall view of what we'll do here. So I have this quotation from Gregory Bateson, who for me is one of the greatest minds of the 20th century. I mean, not very many people know about his work, but he was an absolutely brilliant person. You want to interrupt, Dean?
I do. I just wanted to let you know that while you are the author and you are the guest, so you can take this as far as you'd like, but I'll just let you know how far I was going to go, was down to the, perhaps it's it's more than that. It's a half dozen little paragraphs below that ends again with, according to Bateson, the likelihood of IGS survival is that of a snowball in hell. Before the...
That's kind of what I would do too. So
great, thank you very
we're on
much.
the same page, yep.
Right.
So this is the quote from Gregory Bateson, and it's from Steps to an Ecology of Mind, which he published in 1972. It is probably his, well, it's the one that I read the most. He has several other publications as well, but this is Steps to an Ecology of Mind. If you put God outside and set him vis-a-vis his creation, and if you have the idea that you are created in his image, you will logically and naturally see yourself as outside and against the things around you. As you arrogate all mind to yourself, you will see the world as mindless and therefore not entitled to moral or ethical consideration. The environment will seem to be yours to exploit. Your survival unit will be you and your folks, or conspecifics, against other social units, other races, and the brutes and vegetables. If this is your estimate of your relation to nature and you have an advanced technology, your likelihood of survival will be that of a snowball in hell. So this is my commentary. I read this quote from Gregory Bateson with a sinking heart. 47 years ago, he foresaw so clearly the predicament we find ourselves in today. The dominant industrial growth society, also abbreviated as IGS, is largely based on a brand of Christianity that puts God outside his creation and sees humans, or at least light-skinned humans of European ancestry, as created in his image. Therefore, many people in the industrial growth society logically and naturally see themselves as outside and against the things around them. Almost all large corporations in today's rapacious economy treat the world as mindless and therefore not entitled to moral or ethical considerations. Most corporations view the environment as something to be exploited for short-term profits. This is very sad. This is the case, but it is, as far as I can see. Mainstream thinking in the industrial growth society assumes without question that only human beings have intelligence or mind. Ignoring the vast intelligence embedded throughout the web of life that sustains us all, this logic gives an outside creator all the credit, which passes along to us made in his image, humans. And again, light-skinned humans. And what about your survival unit will be you and your folks or conspecifics against other social units, other races, and the brutes and vegetables. A competitive social and economic system tends to limit people's survival unit to the companies they work for, their immediate families, and perhaps their neighborhoods or towns, and or their political parties. Other social units, other races, and the brutes and vegetables as seen as competitors or inferiors or even enemies. White supremacy is an ugly result of this worldview. As if any individual or any family or any company or any neighborhood any human institution could survive without the larger community, without some form of government or social organization, and especially without the oxygen, water, food, and materials supplied by the fruits and vegetables and the ecosystems of Earth. We can't, clearly we can't. If this is your estimate of your relations to nature and you have an advanced technology, your likelihood of survival will be that of a snowball in hell. I believe this is what we humans are faced with today. Unfortunately, all life on Earth is threatened by a few humans that hold this estimate of your relation to nature. They also tend to be the ones with the most access to an advanced technology. So according to Bateson, the likelihood of the industrial growth society's survival is that of a snowball in hell. So that's what I see us facing today. And it's becoming increasingly difficult for me to see all of us as kind of equal. There are so many people that are so thoroughly embedded in that worldview and acting out of that embeddedness, and that it's agony to watch the news every day, as I'm sure it is for you as well. So let me pause and see if anyone has any comments or questions they'd like me to pursue. And Satya Deva, we can't hear you, you could type it into chat. In fact, anyone can type it into chat if you want to. Her record, she's Tamara Alferoff using Satya's computer. So anything you want to contribute, you can go ahead and type into chat. So any comments or responses?
So Molly, I'm happy to. I'm reluctant to, because I don't want to monopolize the airwaves here. Please, if you have something to share, a question or something to add to the conversation, please let us know either in the chat or wave your hand or just unmute yourself and come on in. Excuse me. I noticed that really what motivated me to again contact you for this conversation is, you know, we're not kidding around here. You and Joanna and the crew that over the years have maintained and evolved the Work That Reconnects, you're some of the longest standing facilitators at scale on the planet in this conversation. And I don't hold that lightly. I think that's extraordinary, and I honor it deeply. And there are some others of us that have been doing other, perhaps similar work in our own way, slightly different emphasis and so on, that I would like to call out to whatever degree one is comfortable doing so. There are a couple of folks that I know on this call that have designed work and or delivered work of this caliber, of this, you know, heft for some time, and I would really be so interested to find out from those who've been doing the work for some time what's called for now that wasn't 20 years ago.
And there's some really good stuff coming into chat, so just take a moment to connect with that. Somebody asked what IGS stands for, Industrial Growth Society. This is a term, it was introduced by a Norwegian whose name is, I can't grasp right now. But it's the idea that it's about industry and it's about growth, economic growth. That's why those two words are in there. It's basically, with this group, I'm going to be really bold. It's basically capitalism. It's a system that is built on the idea that profit is the most important thing. and pays very little attention to the effects of the profit-making activities that go on.
Right.
And Michelle wrote in, another systems thinker, Dana Meadows, suggests that transforming and even transcending a paradigms of thought are the critical pieces for transforming systems. How do we transform or transcend the core paradigms of the IGS? It only exists because of the worldview we have, or that is the dominant worldview. And that's what Gregory Bateson is speaking to. He's saying, if this is your worldview, you're doomed. And so how do we change that paradigm? How do we transform it?
Yeah.
And Art has responded. And Art, I know you from somewhere else. Your name is very familiar.
You know, if I may, I'd like to go right to Naresh's comment. Naresh is one of the people I was nudging when I was talking about people who have designed and delivered this kind of work. And Naresh, I'd so appreciate it if you would come on and speak from at this point you've made. I feel that this is the work we need to do now, and I don't know of anyone who knows how to do it. So if you have anything to add to that, I'd love to hear you.
Thank you, Dean. I wish I did, but you know, as you know, I've been working in transition towns and working in that space for probably the last 15 years or so, and we are we always adopted a kind of two-pronged approach that we needed to transform the world around us, particularly the place in our immediate neighborhoods, and create resilient communities. And at the same time, we need to do the inner work to transform ourselves, because the industrial growth society is inside every one of us. We have, whether we like it or not, we have that inside of us. And even those of us who have been doing this work for many years, it's still inside of me. So it's or I am it, probably the better way of putting it. And then there's also a part of me that isn't it, that is living a different way. And I think it's the best way I can put it is that we're both living. We're living a new paradigm, but we still have a foot in the old paradigm, and sometimes we liken that to you know those kind of moving walkways, you know, like you have a foot on a moving walkway that's going in one direction, sort of along the industrial growth society way, and then you then try to put a foot on another moving walkway that's going in the opposite direction. Things get very uncomfortable very quickly when you start to do that. But nonetheless, that feels like kind of the work we need to do. And now what's stirring here in the UK is not just doing that work of creating resilient communities, but XR is happening here. It's becoming a very powerful viral movement very quickly. I've never seen anything like it. The meetings, the local meetings I've been going to here have grown from a few people to 150 people in the space of a few months. And we're planning on occupying various parts of London starting on Monday next week. So, and it feels like that kind of active resistance is really needed now.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And we feel, and I feel very privileged that we feel very privileged here in the UK that we can do that without putting ourselves in a great deal of harm, unlike many people in the world and in many parts of the world. Doing the sort of protests we're doing would be pretty painful, pretty difficult.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I knew you had at least a few words in there. Molly, did you want to respond to that? Because if you don't, I'd be happy to.
This gets to this thing about which actually towards the end of my essay I include, you know, this taught by many spiritual traditions, you know, change yourself and then the world will change. And that's only partially true, because yes, we need to work on ourselves. We need to find new ways of thinking and living our personal lives that are more smaller footprints, more sustainable, and so forth. And I can do that till the cows come home, and it won't change the system. The systems have to be changed too. I'm reading a book called The New Universe and the Human Future. A friend of mine sent me. It's just fascinating. And just this morning, I read this part about the fact that as we go up in scale, the characteristics do not necessarily carry over. So you can have a group of humans who are individually very moral and loving and kind people. But when they form a large enough organization, if it's like 10 people, it's probably still fine. But if you get into organizations of hundreds or even thousands of people, those individuals, the characteristics of that larger system bear almost no resemblance to the individuals in it. So we have to learn, what this is advocating is that we have to learn how to upscale our values so that they do affect these larger systems. And I think, frankly, protest is a great way to do that, because it's visible with our media, it gets coverage, and it's bound to have an effect on people's consciousness. I mean, that's how we got civil rights in the United States and in South Africa. It's how change happens. We can't just meditate in our rooms. We need to do that too. I'm not taking that away, but it's not sufficient. So we have to change our systems, is what I'm saying. And how to change them is another question.
Yeah. I'd like to just throw out a few suggestions that I've been working on for about 5 years now, in terms of, so if not the old ways of doing this kind of work, what do we need to include? So if not that, then what? Excuse me, and how could we have it evolve? And some elements that I have been landing on time and again in this conversation is the inclusion of, you know, Naresh was just mentioning Extinction Rebellion, and I'm just so deeply appreciative of their emphasis on this, and Greta Thunberg's emphasis on telling the truth. One of the elements that has to be, as far as I'm concerned, because it just keeps showing up in every conversation like this that I'm in, that without that commitment to brazen truth-telling, that we're going to cripple all of our best of intentions. We just can't move forward without that being the first step. Absolutely. The second would be the inclusion of grief, the inclusion of being able to more fully experience the full range of human expression, and a fairly common, ubiquitous gateway into that is grief, especially in these times. So I'm just deeply pleased that Extinction Rebellion is including that to some degree in their group work as they establish yet another location where they're putting together these groups. They're including that, that topic as a very active practice for those who wish to take it on. I also want to speak to a recent conversation I had with a futurist, a man who designs human systems in a bioregional regenerative systems. His name is Joe Brewer. And on my podcast recently, and I asked him, so what are the skills that people who care at this point in time really intend to move forward in some way against this massive predicament that we're in. And he said, the shorthand of his answer was advanced self-regulation skills and psychological flexibility. So I'm not going to take too much time to talk about that, because you could just go watch the episode of the podcast if, you know, there's plenty there. But I just want to notice that I have thousands of what I call impossible conversations with people. And my experience is, especially here in the States, we are not well equipped in either of those. The average American does not have much in the way of self-regulation skills, the ability to bring ourselves back to our wits, back to a sense of wholeness and a sense of being at home in our own system, when so much trauma and so much drama and so much of just the stress of the workaday world, not to mention the predicament, tends to take us out of that. So without skills to bring ourselves back and to be facile with that distinction, we're going to be constantly a number of steps back from where truly the action can happen. And the psychological flexibility, you know, really the bottom line for me there is we need to include in this kind of work at least the basic principles of individual and collective shadow dynamics. So again, this is a whole different topic. For some of you, you know what I'm talking about, others will not. What I'd like to do is invite others who are involved with this kind of work over time, or you have strong experience, to respond to what Naresh has just been saying. Before that, what Molly's been saying. What do you see is called for in these times, in this work that is now often called deep adaptation? So please.
Let me respond, Dean, before other people have a chance. For one thing, what you're talking about is the personal work that we all need to do, and it's not enough. But if we're going to be active in the larger stage, we need to have done that work so that we don't get freaked out, we don't lose it, we don't become violent, we don't, you know, just become disabled from our strong feelings. So someone has asked if I could speak the difference between authentic hope and wishful thinking, and I'll do that in a minute. But I wanted to just say the Work That Reconnects, you know, give a plug for the Work That Reconnects, because in the workshops that we do, we come together and share our grief. We share our gratitude as well. We start with gratitude because it opens up the heart. And gratitude itself is revolutionary, because to be grateful means that you're happy with what you have and appreciate it, and you don't have to rush off and buy the latest gadget because you're already grateful for what you have. It's contrary to consumerism, gratitude tends to be. And then we move into honoring our pain for the world. And those words are carefully chosen. Honoring our pain for the world. Not just feeling it and expressing it, but honoring it. We feel these feelings because we are interconnected. If we weren't interconnected, we wouldn't give a damn. And people who have cut themselves off from their interconnection have a harder time getting in touch with their feelings. But they're there, they're just buried, they're just suppressed. So the Work That Reconnects helps people feel supported in getting in touch with those feelings and expressing them, because we are all in this together, and sharing our feelings together is really, really important. And that enables us to start seeing with new eyes. It's like the scales fall from our eyes, and we start to see how interconnected we really are, and start seeing the world in a whole different way, and seeing ourselves related to our ancestors, and what we did at the beginning, which may have seemed a little bit of a long time process, but still we're honoring the past, we're honoring the ancestors, we're honoring the people and places that have brought us to where we are today. And then we also connect with beings of the future who are totally relying on us to turn things around so they have a livable world, if there even is one. So that's all part of and connecting to the natural world. I'm going to give a plug for a book. I'll put it in chat in a minute. It's called The Overstory by Richard Powers, and it's about trees and our relationship to trees. It's a novel. It's an amazing book. So ways that we can, that's all part of seeing with new eyes. And then the last phase is going forth. Having seen with new eyes, having shared our grief, having shared our gratitude, how do we want to go forth? What do we want? How do we want to act in the world to change things? And we don't, in the work, we don't prescribe a particular activity, because that has to come from within. It has to come from each person's interests and talents and gifts and limitations, so that we each have to find our own way of acting. We don't say, all have to get out there with Extinction Rebellion on the streets. Maybe we just write essays. That's what I do, because I live in a small town in a remote area. So we each have to find our own way of going forth. So there's my plug for the Work That Reconnects, because I think it does what Dean is suggesting needs to happen. It helps us develop resilience and what did you call it? Emotional flexibility.
Yeah, well, it's actually psychological flexibility, but a full emotional range, access to the fullness of our range as human beings.
And an ability to observe that, to self-observe it. Self-observation is so important. So if we get angry, we take a step back and say, okay, where is that coming from? What's happening here? Oh, this person reminds me of my father who was, or whatever. We have the ability to check out our feelings and not just allow them to just take us away from our center. And then from that center place, we can express them. So it's not a matter of repressing feelings, but it's a matter of having both a center place and an ability to express. So, good. Somebody wrote in the Overstory book. Thank you, Dean, for doing that.
Molly,
yes.
About the Work That Reconnects, I'm really interested in the evolution of this work with the evolving edge that's happening, that's decolonizing the Work That Reconnects. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more about that and talk about that. Thank you.
Because the Work That Reconnects was developed primarily by white people, people of European ancestry, it didn't ignore social justice issues, but the emphasis was definitely on the environment and our relationship to the larger earth. And in the process, we became aware of the fact that some things didn't fit for people of what we call now the people of the global majority, rather than people of color, people of the global majority, because actually us white folks are in the minority. Guess what? We don't seem to be on this screen, but in fact, that is the case. So, for example, one thing that there has been part of the work has been 3 stories, and the business as usual and the great unraveling and the great turning. And we talk about the great unraveling as starting with the Industrial Revolution. Well, if you're an indigenous person on Turtle Island in the United States, the great unraveling started 525 years ago when the Europeans first started coming to the Western Hemisphere. So we've expanded, we're trying to expand that story to say the great unraveling has been happening for probably longer than that, if you look at it from the long view. So that's just one example of how we're trying to look at both the theory and the practices of the work that reconnects and how they may impact in a negative way people of the global majority, so that their voices and their perspectives can become a more part of the work. Is that sufficient, or do you want me to say more?
Oh no, that's fine. I'm just really excited. I feel like it's really, yeah, it's more inclusive and more expansive, and so I just wanted to get your take on it. So yeah.
It's also really, really challenging. And you know, as a white person enculturated in the way, I mean, I've only been waking up to the extent of white supremacy in the last, say, 4 years. And I'm 77. So it's like, it is a new way of seeing with new eyes. Oh my gosh. Everything is in terms of European history and European culture and European music and European art and European everything, and starting to really open up to the contributions of other cultures. So, and the suffering of other cultures, I have to say too.
And how do you see, sorry, I'll just ask one more question. Like, how do you see, or do you, like, I mean, obviously it's evolving and it's hard to predict, but how do you envision that this will change the conversation, and how could it evolve to bring more, I guess, more people coming together?
Well, it's already changed it. I mean, it's changing it rapidly day by day. And I teach a facilitator development program with 2 other women for people who want to facilitate the work that reconnects and want, you know, some help learning how to do that. And one of the 3 of us is a woman of color, Mutima Imani. And every time we get together to meet, to plan what we're going to do, I learn something from her. I learn, you know, it's more of a widening. It's like my perspective is here, and talking with her and working with her. And that's just one person, one Black woman. It's, you know, and if I were to be working with an indigenous person, I'd be learning other things. If I was working with a Chinese person, I would be learning other things. So it's just a constant expansion and inclusion for me of a wider view, as well as obviously including other people. Joanna facilitated 3 cohorts of people of color in the Bay Area. Joanna Macy, who's the founder of Work That Reconnects, or root teacher is what she calls herself. And she was the only white person, but she was the root teacher, so she had to be there. And they were very different from workshops with white people, and transformative. And Mutima took part in the first one, and that's how she came into the work. So, and there's value in having workshops, like there have been workshops for just men, and there's been workshops for young people, and there's been workshops for older people. And there's value in doing that, as well as having integrated groups. So,
Molly, I'd like to tug you in a slightly different direction. Remember, there was a question just a little while back from Matthew about the difference between authentic hope and wishful thinking. And before you answer that, I'd also like to mention that it looks like the folks that are using Satya Deva's equipment there at the workshop have a question also, and they're able to speak now. They have a microphone. So you could take either of those or neither.
Okay, well, let me do Matthew's, and then we'll do the group, because I'm really interested in that one too.
Thank you.
Authentic hope. Well, in the deep adaptation circles, I think a hope is almost a bad word, because hope is like, oh, I hope somehow, I want to have a hope so that I don't just go into despair. Well, maybe we need to go into despair. Maybe we need to really, really feel the grief. And if we do it together, we tend not to get depressed. Depression is, I think, when we don't really fully allow those feelings. And so they're kind of dragging us down without really being honored and expressed. So one of Joanna's books is called Active Hope. She wrote it with Chris Johnstone, who lives in the UK. And the idea there is, what gives us hope is when we actually do something. When we actually do something to make it better, we feel better. Even if it doesn't work, it's like there's some psychology there of active hope being engagement and being participation. And even if it doesn't work the way we want it to, we have had that experience of engagement with other people. And that itself is enlivening and creating resilience. So wishful thinking is, oh, I hope it gets better. In a way, I would say, to connect with what Ophelia was just bringing up, before I was wishful thinking that the civil rights movement had solved the problems of racism in the United States. That was wishful thinking. It wasn't true. But becoming engaged and active with people of the global majority in facing these issues, that I can't even say it brings me hope. It's almost like it transcends hope. I feel alive and engaged, even if I'm going to die tomorrow. And even if we all die tomorrow. In the meantime, we've been participating as fully as possible in life, and that's what counts. I think that's what matters. So I'll go to the other one. Well, let's hear it. Seeing as how you can talk now. The group in Italy. I'm not hearing you. I still can't hear you. I see your mouth moving. Oh, darn it. So I guess you'll have to put it in chat. I'm sorry. Let's see. And oh, incidentally, I wanted to mention this is if you want to save the chat, you can go to the, there's a couple little dots in the lower right-hand corner of your chat screen. If you click on that, it says Save Chat. It'll save it to your computer. So all these wonderful things that other people are writing, you can go back and read later if you can't catch it all now. But I do want to read a passage that Spring has submitted. Despair is the absence of hope, but hope is not the absence of despair. Hope is a fire tended by the stewards of the heart, lighting the meandering path through despair, hope, despair, hope. So,
Can I add to that, Molly?
Sure.
I just really appreciate what you have embodied about this notion of hope, and I want to say that it is because the cultural environment I grew up with was not dominated by this dualistic thinking, and I continue to observe that in the modern world, the Western world, there's this there's this separation of poles, and we have to. And my feeling is we need to learn to redefine these. What is hope? What is wellness? What is life? That actually continue weaves the other poles instead of reject the bad, the sickness, the death, the despair. And that's an embodied skill. And I appreciate you bring that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. You've said it very well.
Since we're on this topic of hope, I'd like to just put in a plug for a person who was recently interviewed by Jem Bendell in his series of interviews this year. Deb Ozarko has a book called Beyond Hope. And I've been diving in pretty deep into the whole topic of hope and its usefulness or its destructive nature. And by far the most powerful expression about hope that I've ever read is Deb Ozarko's Beyond Hope. I'll put it in the chat.
Do that. Thank you. I'd like to see it. Yeah. And I was just thinking about another aspect for me. This is personal. This is how I'm dealing with it. Is knowing that human knowledge is limited. We don't know everything about everything. And that isn't a matter of hope, but it's a matter of, I guess, humility of, yeah, it looks like we are in the course of destroying life on this planet, and certainly human life, and maybe all complex life. Who knows where it could go? And there may be that life is very strong and resilient, and there may be things happening that we don't even know about that will somehow counteract human foibles and faults. I don't know, but somehow not knowing feels better to me than, well, we're screwed and there's nothing we can do about it, and so we might as well just give up. It's staying open to the promptings of life and knowing that I don't know it all. And none of us know it all.
Mm-hmm.
I have another quote from Gregory Bateson about that, but I'd have to look it up, so I don't have it memorized.
So just a reminder, Molly, that you and I gave some thought to including another portion of your paper. And if that seems right, just make the call. Otherwise,
Sure.
I'd like to put out the invitation for more questions or more thoughts from anyone.
Yeah, I want to read what Matthew just wrote in chat.
Yeah.
It's likely that the universe and life and the Gaian system are more creative than our models of understanding allow. well said. That's kind of what I'm trying to say. And Ophelia has put in a quote from Joanna Macy from Active Hope, which you can read later. So yeah, let's unless somebody has something burning they want to say, and I'll pause for a moment in case you do. We can go and do a little practice. One of the things we do often in the Work That Reconnects is called open sentences, and it can be applied to almost anything. I really want to share it with you, partly so that it's a technique you can use in almost any situation. And it's open sentences instead of questions. And there's an important reason for that. When we ask a question, how do you feel about this? There's the subtlest of implication that there's a right or wrong answer. And it is because we've all been socialized through school systems where there was a right or wrong answer to a question. So even if the question seems really open-ended, it can still have carry that energy. So open sentences would be, rather than that, it would be, when I look at the world situation, I feel, and then you say that, and then you just keep talking, and you just say whatever comes after that. It's more inviting, and and like I said, you can compose them for almost anything. But we thought, Dean had the suggestion that we read the poem that I include in my essay by Wendell Berry, and that we do a couple of open sentences in response to that. And what Dean will do is divide you into groups of 3, except for the group of 7 that are listening in. You 7, maybe you'll have a couple of 2s and a couple of 3s, I don't know, work it out. But you can just do this amongst yourselves. We won't put you in a group. Can you do that, Dean? Can you avoid putting them in a group? Yeah. And everybody else will be in 2s or 3s, depending on how the numbers work out. And so I'm going to read the poem, and then I'm suggesting this open sentence. And we'll put it in the chat so you don't have to remember it. Listening to the Wendell Berry poem, I feel. So you just start talking about how you feel after listening to the poem. And then after a few minutes, we can introduce into your little breakout groups. They'll be at the top of the screen. You can, a second sentence is what I'd say in response to this poem is. So the way I'd like you to do this, we're going to do the poem first, obviously, and then we'll go into the breakout groups. Is everyone respond to the first open sentence in your group, and take 2 or 3 minutes to do so. In other words, you don't just finish the sentence, you can say some more afterwards. And we'll give you some timing. We haven't worked out the timing, Dean, so we'll have to figure this one out. But we'll give you a switch to the next person. So each person, let's say 2 minutes. So all 3 of you or 2 of you will speak for 2 minutes in response. And then we'll introduce the second sentence, and you can all do that one in response. So you get to hear each other's responses as well as expressing your own. Is that clear as mud?
Well, Molly, I'm gonna repeat a variant of what you just said when we're done. Okay. So I've got it set up. Excuse me. I've got it set up so that what they're going to see this on the screen while you're reading it. And
Good.
then I'm going to give them basically the same sort of instructions you were just giving. So go ahead and just launch right into Wendell Berry whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Go ahead. Well, if you're going to put it on the screen, I'll read it off the screen. So go ahead and do that. It's one of his most challenging poems, I have to say. So it's called Questionnaire. How much poison are you willing to eat for the success of the free market and global trade? Please name your preferred poisons. For the sake of goodness, how much evil are you willing to do? Fill in the following blanks with the name of your favorite evils and acts of hatred. 3. What sacrifices are you prepared to make for culture and civilization? Please list the monuments, shrines, and works of art you would most willingly destroy. 4. In the name of patriotism and the flag, how much of our beloved land are you willing to desecrate? List the following spaces: the mountains, rivers, towns, farms you would most readily do without. 5. State briefly the ideas, ideals, or hopes, the energy sources, the kinds of security for which you would kill a child. Name, please, the children you would be willing to kill.
All right. So what Molly was talking about before is we're going to break into small groups, groups of approximately 3. So please bear with it if you have 2. And if you happen to have 4, then just have it, every group have a timekeeper. And we're going to take, we'll take approximately 12 minutes. 12 minutes. So that would be 4 minutes for each of 3 people. More if you have 2, less if you have 4. And
there's someone that has to leave at on the hour, so that person will be signing off. That's okay. Janet. Yeah.
Okay. So
sorry, Janet.
So the idea is you probably won't have memorized the content of the poem. It's really to check into what are the feelings that have come into you during this call, and particularly during the poem. And an opportunity to share something from your heart to the other people in your small group.
Well, if we can't go here, I invite you all to just sit with your feelings from hearing the poem. And perhaps, Dean, could you take a moment to put it on the screen?
Yes.
Share the screen again so
yes.
people can look at it and read it again. So let's read the poem again silently, each one of us, and keep breathing. And those of you on the phone can't see it, but remember it as well as you can. Gonna work, Dean?
I'm going to stop the sharing, the screen share, so be ready for that.
Okay. So I'm wondering if we can just popcorn style.
Yeah.
If you have a feeling you want to share, and let's just limit it right now to feelings. Just unmute yourself and speak. And if 2 people do it at once, then one of you gives way and the other one speaks. So let's just do it popcorn and whatever anyone wants to share in the way of feelings in response to that poem. Listening to that poem, I feel. Go ahead, Art. Just go for it.
Go for it. Okay. Well, the feeling that I get from this is it's excellent and straightforward. Sorry if I'm in an echo chamber. It's a way of gently jolting somebody out of their complacency. And
so you feel jolted?
Do I feel jolted?
Uh-huh.
A little bit. I mean, it's not new to me. It's not new to a lot of people here. But the feeling that I have is that it's an excellent way to approach people who are of a certain mindset.
Well, Art,
everything is fine.
I would like a feeling from you. That's a thought.
The feeling is
way to approach people, but just on a feeling level, emotional. What emotions come up for you when you hear that poem?
It's painful to face that reality.
Thank you.
Because every single stanza or whatever relates to all of us. But right, I was thinking of how to, we were talking about earlier of people who are of a certain mindset and how a consciousness shift has to happen. This is not enough, but this is something to make somebody kind of blink back into consciousness that, oh yeah, if I keep on doing as I'm doing, these are the consequences. So I like it. I'd never heard this before, and I like it a lot.
We'll try and post it in the chat as well, so you can.
I just popped it in.
Oh, good, good.
So the good news is that I'm back, and the bad news is that I will not have this capability for the rest of this call, but it will be on future calls. So Molly, thank you for getting this going. And do we have a few more people who would be willing
to share feelings?
To share their response?
Michelle.
Thanks. So I had this image that came up of as if I'd been sitting in darkness for a really long time, and suddenly the lights came on and I could see the bars of the cage.
Wow. Thank you for that.
And the anger that I didn't realize I was holding was suddenly really vivid.
Thank you. There's a lot of stuff in our culture about anger being bad. Anger is not violence. Anger can lead to violence, usually when it's not given sufficient outlet otherwise. But anger itself is our passion for justice. And it can motivate us.
I felt guilt to begin with. I got an image of children sewing the seams of my T-shirt and sort of thinking of all this. But then I thought of the interconnectedness of, and it made me feel connected and powerful. Suddenly I had a response that if we are all interconnected, then who I am and who I'm being right now in this moment can be a positive effect on the web.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you, Matthew. Amber.
Okay. It triggered me a bit, Molly, what you said about the anger, because I had the image reading that poem that I would like to have an arc and shoot those people who are not listening. So I'm not sure about the difference between anger and violence. And I think it's a very, well, I don't know, I think it's good to feel the anger and it's good to transform it, but sometimes to be honest, sometimes I'm really not sure if it's enough. Sometimes I do have the fantasies to just go and, you know, I just would like to make them disappear, those who don't listen. And I know somehow it's not the way leading to peace, but I also know that I do have these images of getting rid of this ignorant mass.
Amba, you haven't done that. You haven't acted on those images.
No, I haven't done that.
That's the difference. That's the difference.
I haven't done that, but I just want to share here that, I mean, I can easily relate to people who just go mad because it's so much nonsense here. Yeah. So I haven't done that, but I know I have the potential to do it.
Yes, we all do.
Yeah, so just share this.
Thank you for sharing that. It's really important.
Amba, I also want to thank you for that. That's what I was mentioning about shadow. We are often so wondering in the States, gee, how did we end up with a president like this? And how did we end up as a culture that's putting children, separating children and families and putting them in little concentration camps? How could this possibly be? This is not who we are. And that's what constitutes shadow. As soon as there's a part of us that we refuse to see, that we refuse to bring to the light, just like you have just now, Amba, with us, that becomes shadow. And it's clear to me that we are now living in a world that is governed and ruled and saturated in shadow, in brutal and traumatic aspects and violent, extremely violent aspects that we decline to bring into the light for ourselves individually and collectively. That's why I was suggesting, at least at a very basic level, some of the shadow dynamics are extraordinarily important, I would say, in this kind of work, as if we're going to move forward and have the work evolve to be relevant, like we were talking about earlier. Amba, thank you.
Any other feelings? Radical Joy? I can't remember what your personal name is.
Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't realize I'd be logging in on this account. Well, I had a lot of just resistance come up. I felt accused, and reading it the second time, I wanted to say, yeah, but I just wanted to say, yeah, but. And so that was my response.
Yeah, but, yeah, like,
yeah, but I don't want to eat poisons, but I do want to eat. And so, yeah, so there was just that kind of a real ego response of some identity that wanted to say, no, not me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Really, that's another shadow. Thank you for sharing that.
I'd like to come in here.
Good.
What came up for me was irritation, which is quite strange. I read it the first time and I liked the poem, and then the second time I felt oddly irritated, and I had to sit with that. And it was as if there were two parts of me. The one that was getting caught up in the call to sort of step into a posture of virtue signaling, you know, that this is a poem that's written for other people. And then another part that wants to say, yeah, well, why not, you know, if we're going to do shadow work, you know, it's not enough to feel guilty. There has to be a certain acknowledgement of pleasure. And I think that that's something that's often missing in the shadow work that we're calling on people to do, is to say, you know, it's easy to acknowledge and say, yeah, I'm one of the bad guys and I feel really bad about it. But what about, yeah, there are kids that I want to kill because I want to eat my good food, or I want to go and I want to shop at the great shops, and there's pleasure in it. And I love my great car and my wonderful house. You know, so there's a certain irritation in the hypocrisy that gets called forth by a poem like this, which makes it easy to virtue signal and point fingers. And I think that that's something that I want to put forward, is to invite people to really be brave and step into, as much as there's a horror at the implications of something like this, to step into the pleasure of it, the sheer delight of our world and the gifts that it's given us, and to understand that the shadow is so deeply rooted in us. It's not going to be enough to simply feel guilty. So I think that's what sits behind my irritation. Thank you.
Oh, I am so moved by the depth of your sharing, everyone who's shared so far. This is amazing. Maybe just as well we didn't go into small groups, Dean. Is there anyone else?
Yeah, I had the same feeling of wanting to point fingers. These are the people who are doing these things, but then this dichotomy of having, you know, our feet in both worlds. I mean, everything behind me is the result of fossil fuel. There isn't one thing in this room that didn't get here because of fossil fuels. And my little plastic clamshell that my blueberries came in, I supported the plastic industry by buying those blueberries. And when I drive in a car, I'm willing to pollute the air in someone's neighborhood where kids live, you know. So I'm just, you know, sort of caught in this like dichotomy of these feelings that can't really, in some ways, don't go anywhere. The only out I get into is when I finally grieve about it all, and then something changes with it. And that's been the saving grace for me in the last month, is being able to grieve about things that I'm part of. And unless the system changes, my feet are in both worlds. And it's okay. I'm coming to live with that and just, you know, live the best I can. But there's so many things I do that or, you know, causing a tree to be cut down or something, you know, I mean, just, well, that's it.
You're saying it, Christopher. You're saying it for all of us. How do we cope with the fact that we're all implicated? And I can say, well, I'm helpless because this larger system is making me do this. And if only they would start making electric cars, and you know, we can go there. That finger pointing thing, and or anger or blaming somebody else, and being with the grief of the way our world is set up and our own culpability, if you will, in that world. It's the only way out I know. And from grief comes compassion, so that instead of blaming those other people, we could start to have compassion for them and for ourselves.
And one thing that's helped me is like this, the artist's journey kind of idea, where you then find your deepest calling, your gifts you need to give, and then you go for it. And you get the will that I need to do this anyway, in spite of the outcome.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what's going to happen, but we each have our sort of connection to the deeper part of us that wants to give and be part of the world. And so find that, and then there's that act of hope comes in.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little bit of a way to undo the unresolvable grief and our involvement in this whole process. You know, it seems to help. I think it is helping. It is like,
it is helping.
Yeah.
And something you said reminded me of, you know, from deep within. To me, deep within is the universe. It's like when I go deeply within, I'm not getting to a little isolated private place that nobody else connects to. I'm getting to the universal within myself, the web of life, if you will, the spark of life. You could have a lot of different words for it, but that's my belief.
Can I share?
Spring wants to share, and then also Jane. So go ahead, Spring.
So my feeling responding to this poem, the first is immense grief, because my experience is I have eaten poison for the sake of blah, 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 and I have desecrated land, and I have participated in killing children for the sake of ideas. And that grief is connected with that acknowledgement of my participation in all of that in whatever subtle way. And I know that neurologically that place of grief is also, so out of that, there's a feeling of ecstasy, because there's something about that deep grief neurologically is connected with the experience of ecstasy, the deep sense of annihilation. I mean, it's something that's hard for the mind to process, but that's actually something physiologically happen, is this intense experience of annihilation and ecstasy are connected, because as I strip away all these social, political, cultural, an image come to my mind. I was a lion or a deer on the African savannah, and for survival we kill each other. In one lifetime I'm the deer, and the other lifetime I might be the lion, and that direct participation of killing of other life and eating it is part of evolution, is part of how life on Earth connected. But I think what pushes me to the edge of evolution is the degree we're willing to do that, the degree at which we're aware of that process, and how can we consciously participate and complete that process.
Thank you, Spring. Jane.
Yeah. So when I was listening to the poem, there's a sense of heaviness through the center of my body, and associated with that is a feeling of the guilt for all of those decisions that were made that had implications, and an acknowledgement of the level of consciousness that was here at the time at which decisions were made and continued to be made, as Christopher says about driving and that kind of thing, but also just understanding that that is reflected in every human being who's also making these decisions of what to do, and so with that there's a sense of there's kind of feels that there's no right here to make the judgments, because I couldn't have been more conscious at the time I was making those decisions in that way. And it doesn't mean that that there shouldn't be action now, and hopefully this dialogue that we're involved in and what's going on generally means that there's more and more people who are essentially coming to our senses. But it's just the sense of, oh, if I was making those decisions, given the privilege and the background and the information and the schooling and everything that I had the benefit of, then how could, people who are struggling with things that have been much more difficult than I have in my life, how can is a sense of like confusion about how to then mobilize and engage those folks in this wider discussion, because we're not ready to hear it until we're ready. So there's sort of anxiety and confusion. So that's what I feel.
Thank you. And Amba has one more word to add.
Yes, I'd like to add something. I didn't wear my glasses before, so I'm not sure if it was Amit Shuri was it you who said the thing about the pleasure? Oh, well, there was a very interesting statement about pleasure. I don't see the person anymore. Maybe she has disappeared.
Was that Spring? Was that you?
No, it was somebody else before. Oh, here she is. Yeah. Elsan. I'd like to add something there, because a few days ago, actually the whole last week, I went through a total crisis, because all of a sudden things just didn't make sense anymore. Nothing made sense anymore, and it was very intense for about 3-4 days, 5, 6, 7 days almost, and I just wanted to share that I don't see the pleasure anymore in proceeding, in going on, in doing a life which is actually harming to me, and not just to everybody else, but it's making harm to me. Sitting in front of the computer, it's like, it's like, I just wanted to add that comment that I'm not, maybe it's different for everybody, right? But I can't see any pleasure anymore in having a car or doing things that are bad, because it hurts me. It energetically, it physically, emotionally, it hurts me, and it hurts everybody else. So maybe it's a different layer, or I find it very interesting to go now to nature and just stay in the jungle and not believing the story of the cars anymore.
Yes, thank you. And our group of 7 in Italy have to leave now, and they're saying goodbye. Thank you. We are moving to a time of closing, but Amita Suri wants to say something. So go ahead, Amita.
Yeah, I missed the start of the call, so I didn't hear about the waving. I was waving online, so thank you. Yeah, I love the poem and the question, how do I feel when I hear the poem? I feel, well, I went on a journey of emotion as somehow I resonate with a lot of what people have said, initial resistance and horror, shock, horror, and then I could see some appeal to destroying particular monuments and preventing other monuments being built. I could see that I actually was attracted to it, and then I realized this is about me and the interconnectedness of us. Yeah, and the horror and the sadness that dawned on me then, realizing that, and it led into the question, what is my response? How do I respond to that knowledge that I'm complicit in this? I want to become big enough to hold that, to hold the complexity that I am part of this system, and what can I do to contribute to the kindness in the world? And the response, like you mentioned, actually, Molly, cannot be but compassion.
And I hold my heart because there needs to be wisdom in this. There needs to be these calls, these connections, this deep listening, how we're each affected by it, and community. Yeah.
Thank you, because that's what I was wanting to say as a closing, and I think Dean probably will have some things he wants to say as well, but we've been sharing for the last 20 or 30 minutes in a very deep way that we're all experiencing connectedness as we do this. At least I am, in the sense that, you know, yeah, we all share these feelings, we share these complexities, we share the confusion, we share the desire for something healthier and better. We're all together in this. So Dean, you probably want to say some closing words too.
I do. And the first words I'd like to say is thank you so much for, I'm moved right now, Molly, for your taking time from your very full world to spend time with us and look at something you've held and you've helped evolve for so long, and now looking with us at how can we all look at evolving our presence, our expressions in the world, whether that be coursework or not. And it's been such an honor to have you here. I thank you so much for all that you've done and all that you've brought to so many people over so many years. And I just hope that you'll pass on our warm regards to the entire Work That Reconnects team, crew. I'm so thankful that you all are doing what you're doing and continuing to evolve yourself. And for all of us on the call, this is the first of what looks to be a series of bringing in people who have a substantial amount of experience in this work that can be called these days deep adaptation, and addressing, so how does it need to keep evolving in order to be powerful and relevant? So please stay tuned. There will be more. Thank you all.
And I'm actually signed up for this forum. I just haven't participated up till now, but I may be present on some of those future calls. Could I do a quick ending? We can all hold hands, those of us on screen. If you hold your hands up to the edge of your screen, then you're holding hands with the person next to you. Yeah. Thank you. If you have any other words, Dean.
Just thank you all so much for your participation, for your hearts, for being willing to be in what can be a very uncomfortable conversation. Thank you for all of that. And I look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Thank you.
Bye-bye. And save your chat.
Save your chat.
Yeah, there's so much good stuff in there.
And Molly, again, thank you. Have yourself a wonderful day out there.
I will. I have to go to the dentist.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.